For over 400 years, a shadow stretched across the Atlantic, a dark chapter in human history written in tears, chains, and blood. Millions of Africans were torn from their homes, their families, and their freedom. They were sold like property and forced into a life of unimaginable suffering. This is the story of the transatlantic slave trade, a system built on greed and cruelty, but also one met with incredible resistance and a will to survive. We must look into this darkness to understand the world we live in today. Before this era of exploitation, Africa was a continent teeming with life, culture, and progress. It was not a single, uniform land, but a tapestry of diverse peoples and powerful empires. Kingdoms like Mali, renowned for its immense wealth and scholarly centers, and the sophisticated societies of Benin and Oyo, flourished. People lived as farmers, cultivating the rich earth. They were traders, connecting vast networks across the continent. They were artists, scholars, warriors, and kings. Bustling markets were filled with goods, and cities were centers of learning and governance. Life was rich with tradition, community, and purpose. But this vibrant world stood on the precipice of a devastating change as ships from distant lands began to appear on the horizon, driven by a thirst for profit and power that would shatter countless lives. In the 15th century, European traders first arrived on the West African coasts, not for conquest initially, but for commerce. They brought with them goods that were novel and, in some cases, destructive: guns, gunpowder, cheap alcohol, and shimmering mirrors. In exchange, they sought gold, ivory, and spices. But soon, their primary demand shifted to human beings. Some African leaders, seeing the power these new weapons offered, were coerced or manipulated into trading captured people from rival groups. Others fiercely resisted, fighting to protect their communities from this horrifying new market. But the economic pressure was immense. Slowly, tragically, human lives were transformed into a commodity, a form of currency to be bartered and sold. The foundation for a global system of forced labor was laid, one that would bring misery on an unprecedented scale. The process of enslavement was brutal and merciless. It was a descent into chaos and fear. European traders and their local allies launched violent raids on unsuspecting villages, often under the cover of night. Homes were set ablaze, and panic ensued. People were hunted down, captured, and bound. Families were ripped apart in an instant, children torn from their parents' arms, husbands and wives separated forever. No one was safe, young or old, strong or weak, farmer or leader. Anyone could be seized. The bonds of community and family, the very fabric of society, were systematically destroyed. Once captured and chained, the long, terrifying journey into bondage began. Escape was nearly impossible, and the world these individuals had known was lost to them forever. They were marched in chains for miles to coastal forts, their first taste of a hell that would last a lifetime. The journey across the Atlantic was a nightmare known as the Middle Passage. It was a voyage of death and despair that lasted for weeks, sometimes months. Enslaved Africans were crammed into the dark, suffocating holds of ships, packed so tightly they could barely move. Chained together in filth, with little food, foul water, and no fresh air, they endured unimaginable conditions. Disease, like dysentery and smallpox, spread like wildfire in the cramped, unhygienic spaces. The weak and the sick were often thrown overboard without a second thought. The death toll was staggering. It's estimated that millions perished during this horrific transit. Faced with this unending torment, some chose to resist in the only way they could. They jumped into the vast ocean, choosing a quick death in the waves over a life of bondage. The Atlantic Ocean became a massive, unmarked graveyard. For those who survived the horrors of the Middle Passage, a new life of suffering awaited them in the Americas. Upon arrival, they were paraded and sold at auctions like livestock. Buyers would inspect their bodies, their teeth, and their strength, bidding on their lives. Families and shipmates who had endured the journey together were often separated again, sold to different owners and sent to distant plantations. They were forced to work from sunrise to sunset in grueling conditions, cultivating sugar cane, cotton, and tobacco under the constant threat of the whip. Overseers enforced discipline with extreme violence. Enslaved people were stripped of their names and given new ones. They were forbidden from speaking their native languages or practicing their religions. Every aspect of their lives was controlled, their humanity denied. But even in the face of such relentless dehumanization, their spirit could not be entirely broken. Despite the overwhelming power and cruelty of the slave system, enslaved people never passively accepted their fate. Resistance was constant, taking many forms. It was in the daily acts of defiance, working slowly, breaking tools, or pretending to be sick. It was in the preservation of their culture, sharing stories, singing songs, and practicing spiritual traditions in secret, keeping the flame of their heritage alive. And it was in open, violent rebellion. Throughout the Americas, enslaved people organized and fought back. They planned uprisings, some of which shook the foundations of the slave-holding societies. Many escaped, forming independent communities in remote areas known as Maroon societies, where they lived as free people. These acts of courage, from small sabotages to large-scale revolts, prove that the human desire for freedom is an unstoppable force that can never be fully chained. Over time, the chorus of voices speaking out against the inhumanity of slavery grew louder and more powerful. The abolitionist movement gained momentum, fueled by the brave testimonies of formerly enslaved people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs, who exposed the brutal realities of the system to the world. Activists, both black and white, organized protests, published pamphlets, and lobbied governments. They argued from moral, religious, and economic standpoints that slavery was a stain on humanity and had to be dismantled. The struggle was long and often met with violent opposition, but their persistence paid off. In the 19th century, nations began to outlaw the slave trade and, eventually, slavery itself. The chains were officially broken in many parts of the world, but the deep wounds left by centuries of bondage had already changed the world forever. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade is deep and far-reaching. It fundamentally shaped the modern world, creating economic systems, social hierarchies, and demographic shifts that persist to this day. The wealth of many Western nations was built on the backs of enslaved labor. The trade left deep and painful scars, systemic racism, social and economic inequality, and the loss of countless histories and cultural lineages. Yet, from this immense pain, incredible resilience emerged. The descendants of those who were enslaved formed the vast African diaspora. Their culture not only survived but thrived, profoundly influencing music, food, language, and art across the globe. Jazz, blues, gospel, samba, and countless other cultural forms are a testament to the enduring power and creativity of the human spirit in the face of oppression. The story of the slave trade is not just a chapter in a history book. It is a living part of our shared past and a profound reminder. It reminds us of the depths of human cruelty and the devastating consequences of greed and dehumanization. But it also stands as a powerful testament to human strength, resilience, and the unquenchable thirst for freedom. To remember this history is to honor the millions who suffered, who resisted, and who died. To learn from it is our collective responsibility to ensure that such an atrocity never happens again. We must never forget, so that we may never repeat. Thank you for watching. If you found this video meaningful, please consider subscribing for more stories that shape our world.